HOA claimed my water was too much. Here's how I took my revenge. It started like any other day. A letter from the HOA claiming my water usage was too much. Too much. For what? A green lawn? A garden that didn't look like a desert? But then came the fine, the threat. They thought they could control me. They didn't know who they were messing with. So I did something they never saw coming. But what happened next was beyond their wildest imagination. Welcome to HOA Unit. Hey everyone, I'm Mark, and this is my story about how the HOA tried to control every little thing I did, including how much water I used. I live in location, and let's just say I'm no stranger to a bit of drama when it comes to these petty rules, but this time I wasn't going to back down. Stick around to hear how I took my revenge and how it all backfired on them. Let's get into it. It all started one Monday morning. The kind of morning that feels like it could go either way. You know the type. Quiet, just the right amount of sunlight peeking through the windows. Everything was normal. Too normal. Then, the letter came. It was tucked under the door, looking all official. A bit too official. The kind of letter you get from places that think they're in charge of everything, but you can never quite remember inviting them into your life. At first, I didn't even think it was from the HOA. I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe it was some random ad or a bill I forgot about. But no. As soon as I saw the familiar logo, my stomach dropped. The letter was from the HOA, and it wasn't just any letter. It was a fine. And not just any fine. They were accusing me of wasting too much water. Too much water. For what? I'd always been the responsible neighbor. My lawn was green, my driveway was clean, and I took care of my yard. What did they mean by too much way? Till I read it over again, thinking I must have missed something. They claimed I was using an excessive amount of water, which, according to their rules, was against their bylaws. Excessive? I watered my grass just like everyone else in the neighborhood. It wasn't like I was running a water park in my front yard. I sat down, rereading the letter, trying to make sense of it. The HOA had been pretty strict in the past, sure, but this felt personal. It felt like they were looking for a reason to mess with me. I mean, I hadn't done anything wrong, right? As I stared at the letter, I could feel the anger rising. This was ridiculous. They had no right to tell me how much water I could use. My lawn wasn't even that big. Sure, it looked good, but it wasn't like I had a tropical rainforest out there. And even if I did, why did they care? This was just another petty move from the HOA, the people who made it their mission to control every little thing in our lives. It wasn't the first time they'd come after me, though. Karen, the HOA president, had always had a problem with me. She didn't like how I kept to myself, didn't like how my house wasn't as perfect as she thought it should be. I'd heard whispers around the neighborhood. Karen had been watching me for a while now, waiting for the right moment to strike. Maybe this was it. It didn't help that Karen was, well, let's just say she was the kind of person who liked to be in charge of everything. Every time I bumped into her at the mailbox, she'd give me that look. The one that says she's always watching. The one that says you're never going to get away with anything. But this was too much. I wasn't about to let her or the rest of the HOA control me. Not over something as stupid as water. I decided I wasn't going to take this lying down. I had a choice. I could either pay the fine and stay quiet, or I could fight back. And I knew deep down I wasn't the type to just roll over. I wasn't going to let Karen and her little HOA clique dictate how I lived my life. So, I did what any sane person would do. I started looking into the rules. I dug through the HOA's documents, scouring every page, looking for some loophole, something, anything that could get me out of this. Because if I was going to fight them, I had to know exactly where they stood. And as I read through the rules, that's when I found it. There it was, buried in some obscure section. A rule about water usage. But it wasn't clear. In fact, it was vague enough that I wondered if they even had a right to fine me in the first place. The whole thing seemed like a setup, like they were trying to find something wrong, anything wrong, so they could hit me with a fine. I couldn't help but laugh. Seriously? They were going to fine me for watering my lawn? The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. But it was also kind of clever. They'd used the rules to their advantage, making sure that no one could ever really fight back. And now they thought they had me. But they didn't. Not yet. I knew I had to act fast. I needed to get ahead of them, to show them that I wasn't going to be pushed around by some HOA president with too much time on her hands. As I sat there, thinking about my next move, I couldn't help but wonder, just how far would the HOA go? How much were they willing to push before someone finally stood up to them? I could already see it in my head. Karen smirking, thinking she had me in a corner. But she didn't know what I was planning. I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. I was going to turn the tables on them, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. But the question remained. What would happen next? What would Karen do when she realized she was messing with the wrong person? The more I thought about the fine, the angrier I became. It wasn't just the fact that they were trying to control how much water I could use. It was the principle of it. They were constantly finding new ways to flex their power over us, the homeowners, and I wasn't having it anymore. But as much as I wanted to tear up that letter and tell them to take a hike, I knew I had to play it smart. I wasn't a rebel by nature, or at least I didn't think of myself as one. I liked peace. I liked quiet. I wasn't looking for drama. But when you're dealing with people who are obsessed with the idea of control, well, sometimes you have no choice but to step up and make a stand. I decided to dive deep into the HOA's rules and regulations. I mean, if they were going to fine me for watering my lawn, then I needed to know exactly what they thought was acceptable. The more I read through their so-called guidelines, the more I realized how ridiculous they really were. There were rules about everything, from the color of your mailbox to the height of your lawn. Apparently, the HOA had nothing better to do than sit around and nitpick about the smallest details of our lives. I found myself shaking my head. These people weren't just trying to protect the neighborhood. They were trying to control every little thing we did. The most absurd one? They required a specific number of bushes to be planted in front of your house. Not too few, but not too many either. Just the right number. Who in their right mind would waste their time counting bushes? But that's what they did. They measured every inch, inspected every corner, and sent out fines when you didn't comply. It was starting to feel like I was living in a dictatorship. But it wasn't just the rules that bothered me. It was how they enforced them. The fines weren't meant to encourage good behavior. They were meant to punish. Karen, the HOA president, had made it clear that she took pleasure in this. She thrived on control. She enjoyed watching people squirm. Every time I saw her in the neighborhood, she had that same smug look, like she was the queen of some small suburban kingdom. I could already feel her eyes on me, watching from her window, waiting for me to slip up. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to let her win. As I scrolled through the HOA's rulebook, I could feel the tension building. How could they possibly enforce these rules without someone eventually pushing back? This wasn't normal. No neighborhood should have this kind of control over its residents, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But here's the kicker. The more I dug into the rules, the more I realized something. It wasn't about the water or the bushes or the mailbox. No, it was much deeper than that. This wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood beautiful. It was about power. The HOA had made it their mission to control us, to keep us in line, and they used rules to do it. They didn't care about how things actually looked. They cared about who had the power. And that power, for now, was in Karen's hands. I couldn't let her think she could control me. I had to find a way to fight back. But how? The rules were stacked against me, and it wasn't like I could just break them without consequences. That's when it hit me. What if I could play by their rules and beat them at their own game? It was a crazy idea at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If I followed every rule to the letter, they couldn't touch me. And if I followed every rule, I could do something they never expected. I knew it was red sky. But at that point, what did I have to lose? I'd already been fined, and Karen wasn't going to stop. If anything, this was her way of trying to get rid of me. But I wasn't going anywhere. I started looking for ways to exploit the rules. I realized that if I followed them perfectly, it would leave no room for the HOA to make any more claims against me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I could use their rules to my advantage. The plan was simple. Follow the rules and use their obsession with detail to turn things around. But there was one problem: Karen. She wasn't just going to let me go that easily. She'd be watching, waiting for me to slip up. But she didn't know what I was about to do. I began by making sure everything was perfect. My lawn was watered exactly the way they wanted it. My mailbox was the perfect height, and I made sure all my bushes were just the right size. It was exhausting, but I didn't care. I was doing this for me and for everyone else in the neighborhood who had ever felt powerless against the HOA. The more I followed the rules, the more I realized just how absurd they were. I mean, who really cares about the height of your mailbox? Who actually checks the color of your lawn? But Karen did. She cared about all of it, and that's what gave me my opening. I wasn't going to just follow the rules. I was going to make them work for me. By the time I had everything in perfect order, I felt like I was ready to take the next step. The HOA couldn't touch me, not if I was following every rule to the letter. But I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for Karen to come after me. No, I was about to make sure that she would be the one who had to deal with the consequences, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. But here's the real question. How far would I be willing to go? How far would you go if you were in my shoes? The fine arrived like a storm I couldn't avoid, but I wasn't going to take it lying down. There it was, in black and white, staring up at me from the kitchen table. The HOA had slapped me with a fine, and not just any fine, a hefty one. They claimed that I had violated their precious water usage guidelines, and the fine reflected how serious they were. At least, that's what the letter said. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again, this time stronger than before. It was ridiculous. How could they fine me for using water, for keeping my lawn healthy? I mean, I wasn't out there watering the sidewalk. This wasn't a criminal act. But to the HOA, apparently, it was. I stood there, staring at the fine, and it felt like the walls were closing in. The neighborhood I had once loved felt more like a prison now. A place where every small detail of your life was scrutinized by a group of people who had nothing better to do than point fingers and look for reasons to fine you. And Karen, she was at the center of it all. I thought about the way she always acted like she was in control, the way she looked down on everyone else. She loved having power, and right now, she thought she had all the power over me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong she was. This fine wasn't just about the water. It was about control. It was about her trying to make me bend to her will. She wanted me to pay up, shut up, and stay in line. But I wasn't going to let her win. I couldn't. Not when I knew she was probably sitting in her house, enjoying the thought of my defeat. Smug as ever, thinking I'd just roll over and take it. Well, she was wrong. I slammed the letter down on the table. No way was I going to pay this fine. I had to figure out a way to make them regret ever messing with me. They couldn't just keep pushing people around like this, not when it was clear they were abusing their power. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone in the neighborhood who had been bullied by the HOA for too long. It was time to take a stand. But how? The rules were so vague, and Karen had a way of twisting them to her advantage. I knew I had to be careful. If I challenged her directly, she'd use every excuse to come after me harder. I needed a plan, a way to get the HOA off my back without giving them any room to retaliate. That's when it hit me. I didn't have to break the rules. I could follow them to the letter and make them work for me. The HOA had their rules, sure, but they weren't foolproof. They were full of holes, full of things that could be twisted around, just like they'd done with the water issue. What if I could turn every rule they had against them? I wasn't about to make a fool of myself by challenging them head-on. No, I was smarter than that. I'd use their obsession with perfection to my advantage. They wanted to control everything? Fine. I'd follow every rule, every demand they had, and I'd make sure they had no choice but to back off. The idea felt like a breath of fresh air. It was the perfect plan. If I could make sure everything was just so, if I could be the perfect model citizen in their eyes, then they couldn't touch me. Not only that, but they'd be forced to leave me alone. And if they thought they were in control now, well, I was about to show them just how wrong they were. I spent the next few days getting everything in line. I followed every rule, made sure everything was in order. My mailbox was the right height. My lawn was the right shade of green. The bushes in front of my house, perfectly spaced. I made sure I was doing exactly what the HOA wanted, even if it felt completely ridiculous. But I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me, and for everyone else who had been pushed around by Karen and her little HOA army. But as I checked off every item on the list, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. This wasn't just about making sure my yard looked perfect. This was about proving a point. It was about showing the HOA that they didn't have the power they thought they did. And if I could pull this off, I knew I'd have the upper hand. Still, a small voice in the back of my mind kept asking, what if it wasn't enough? What if Karen found another excuse to come after me? What if this whole plan backfired and made things worse? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. This fine was just the start, and I had no intention of letting it be the end of me. I'd spent days obsessing over the fine, over Karen, over the whole HOA situation. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let them control me, but I also knew I couldn't just go in guns blazing, throwing everything I had at them. I had to be smarter. And that's when I realized it. The key to beating the HOA wasn't breaking the rules. It was about following them, perfectly, flawlessly. If I could make sure everything was in line, then how could they possibly find fault with me? If I played their game, and played it better than they ever could, it'd be my win, not theirs. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how ridiculous it was. I was playing by their rules, but those rules were absurd. They controlled everything, the height of my mailbox, the color of my fence, and now the amount of water I could use. The more I thought about it, the more it hit me. These people had too much time on their hands. They made up these rules just so they could feel powerful, like they had some say in the lives of everyone around them. So, I started my plan. I began by checking every single thing that the HOA could possibly find fault with. I pulled out the rule book and made a list. The height of the grass? Check. Water usage? Check. My mailbox? It was almost like they wanted it to be perfect. No room for error. I checked everything, from the color of my fence to how many bushes I had in front of the house. It wasn't just about meeting their standards. It was about showing them that I could do it better than they could. And I was going to do it so well that they'd have no choice but to back off. Every morning, I would water my lawn exactly as they dictated. I made sure the bushes were spaced perfectly, the flowers trimmed just right, and the grass cut to the exact height the rule book specified. It was a lot of work, but I had a point to prove, and I wasn't going to give up until they saw it. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The more I followed the rules, the more ridiculous they felt. I mean, who cared about the height of a bush or how many sprinkler heads you had? Was this really what they thought was important? It felt like I was being forced to be perfect in ways that didn't matter. My house, my lawn, my life. They were under the control of a group of people who had nothing better to do than make us live like robots. Still, I had to admit that following their rules did have its perks. My lawn was looking great, better than ever. And honestly, it felt good. It felt good to be in control for a change, even if I was doing something wrong again. This wasn't a mistake. This was her trying to push me into a corner. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I wasn't going to let her see me sweat. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I wrote back. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply pointed out how absurd it was that I was being scrutinized for following the rules. I even included a copy of the guidelines for their reference, just to make sure they understood how perfectly I had adhered to them. But as I sealed the envelope, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really enough? Karen wasn't going to back down, and now the HOA had her backing. They could keep pushing, keep trying to find something to blame me for. How much longer could I keep playing by their rules before it all backfired? As the days turned into weeks, I watched the tension grow. The HOA wasn't just about water anymore. It was about power. And they weren't going to stop until they had me exactly where they wanted me. The worst part? Karen had somehow convinced the other neighbors that I was the problem. Every time I walked past their houses, I felt eyes on me, whispers behind closed doors. They had bought into the HOA's narrative, and now it was just a matter of time before the whole neighborhood turned against me. But I wasn't giving up. I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. I had followed every rule to the letter. But now, it was time to make my next move. The HOA thought they could wear me down with petty threats and fines. They thought I'd cave in and give up, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I couldn't just keep responding to their letters, playing defense. I had to go on the offensive, and that's when I realized, if they wanted a war, I was ready to give it to them. I started paying attention to everything Karen and the HOA were doing, every letter they sent, every word they spoke. I knew that if I was going to turn this around, I had to learn how to play their game better than they ever could. Then, something unexpected happened. One morning, as I was watering my lawn again, just the right amount of water, nothing more, I saw Karen. She was standing across the street, staring at me like she was trying to figure out what I was up to. But this time, something was different. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes weren't filled with that smug satisfaction. There was something else there, something I hadn't seen before. Was it fear? Was she finally realizing that I wasn't the easy target she thought I was? I couldn't help but wonder. Had my careful compliance actually made her more nervous than if I had fought back outright? Was she starting to question if she had overplayed her hand? As I finished watering my lawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The HOA had pushed me so far already. They thought they could control me. But I wasn't going to stop now. It was time to turn the tables, to take control back and make them realize who was really in charge here. But as I stared at Karen from across the street, I had one question on my mind. What was she going to do next? Would she escalate things even further, or would she finally realize that she couldn't break me? I couldn't deny it any longer. The war had begun, and the HOA had just declared the first shot. But this time, things were going to be different. I had spent so much time and energy trying to play by their ridiculous rules, and they thought they had me right where they wanted me. Little did they know, I was about to flip the script entirely. It had been weeks since that last letter arrived from the HOA, and I was getting tired of just reacting to their moves. They had pushed me to the edge, but there was only so much one person could take before they snapped, and I was starting to feel that breaking point. But I wasn't going to let it happen quietly. No. I was going to take control. The HOA loved their rules, the precise way everything had to be done. They had this idea of perfection, right down to the last blade of grass. But what if I could take their obsession with perfection and turn it into a weapon against them? It started small. I began paying extra attention to the smallest details in my yard. The water was being used more sparingly, but at just the right times, at the peak heat of the day when the sun was strongest. Not too much, but just enough to make the grass shimmer. I wasn't breaking any rules, no, but I was getting creative. I wasn't watering the lawn in one clean, controlled fashion anymore. I let the water run just a little longer than normal, just a few extra minutes. The excess water soaked into the ground, spreading beyond the lines of my lawn, moving onto the edges of the sidewalks, the edges of the driveway. It was subtle, a tiny violation, but a violation nonetheless, and I knew exactly what it would lead to. And then, the next day, I saw Karen again. This time, she wasn't just staring at my yard. She was writing something down on a clipboard. She was taking notes, watching me, judging me, looking for the smallest mistake. She was getting desperate. She knew something was up, but she couldn't put her finger on it. I smiled to myself. She had no idea what was coming. A few days later, I received yet another letter from the HOA. But this one wasn't like the others. No, this one was different. The letter was official, with the signature of the board and, of course, Karen's name at the bottom. The letter stated that I had violated the water runoff regulations. Apparently, the excess water had made its way to the sidewalk, and as per the HOA guideline, as this was now considered an issue, they even included a fine this time, one that was far higher than the last. But here's the thing. They didn't know that I had planned this. Every drop of water, every extra second, every inch of the sidewalk that got a little soggy. It was all a part of the plan. I was playing a game now, a game they didn't even know they were in. The more they tried to control, the more I would use their own rules against them. This fine? It was the opening I needed. I wasn't about to pay it. Not yet. I had a better idea. The next step in my plan? Simple. I was going to escalate the situation. But I wasn't going to break a single rule. Instead, I was going to force them into a corner. I was going to make them so obsessed with their tiny, ridiculous regulations that they would be left with no choice but to cave. I started the next phase of my plan immediately. First, I filed a formal complaint about the HOA's ambiguous water runoff rules. I pointed out that the guidelines were not clear enough to be enforced consistently. I cited other cases where residents had watered their lawns without consequences and how the rules had been applied unevenly. I even included pictures of my yard, showing how careful I had been with the watering. I didn't stop there. I began talking to my neighbors, quietly at first, but it didn't take long before the word spread. I made sure to let them know about the rules, about the fines, and how absurd it all was. A few of them were annoyed but didn't have the courage to speak up. But some of them, they started asking questions. They started noticing how absurd everything had become. Karen didn't like it, not one bit. She called me a few days later, clearly upset, demanding that I retract my complaint. She said it wasn't necessary, that I was making things worse for everyone in the neighborhood. But I didn't back down. I told her that the neighborhood deserved better than this, better than her petty reign of rules. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had been bullied by the HOA. It wasn't just about the fine anymore. It was about showing Karen and her little HOA board that they couldn't just walk all over us. But as I continued to push back, I started noticing something strange. Every time I got one step ahead, Karen seemed to get more desperate. She would show up at my house at odd hours, staring at my yard as if she was waiting for me to slip up. The tension was growing. She was getting more aggressive, trying to force me to back down. And the funny thing was, the more she pushed, the more I pushed back. Every time she thought she had me, I was already one step ahead. But I knew it wouldn't be long before things reached a breaking point. I had no idea how far Karen would go to protect her little power trip. The question was, how far was I willing to go? It was only a matter of time before Karen and the HOA would make their move. I had been playing their game for weeks, turning their own rules against them, and I could feel the tension in the air. Every corner of the neighborhood felt charged, as if the entire HOA board was holding its collective breath, waiting for the next mistake, the next move. But the thing was, I wasn't going to make a mistake. Not this time. The final straw came when I received another letter. This one wasn't just a fine or a warning. It was a legal document, a formal complaint from the HOA's lawyer, claiming that I was in violation of neighborhood maintenance codes and demanding that I pay a massive fine or else face legal action. I knew right then and there that they were serious. They had backed me into a corner, trying to intimidate me into submission, but they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. I looked at the letter and couldn't help but smile. They thought they had me. They thought that sending me a threatening letter would be enough to make me crumble, to make me pay up and bow to their control. But what they didn't realize was that I was done playing nice. I had spent weeks following their rules to perfection, letting them think they were winning. But now it was time for the real game to begin. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I wasn't going to pay a dime. In fact, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me back down. Instead, I was going to take it one step further. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and this time, it wasn't about being the perfect model citizen. This time, it was about taking my revenge and making sure that Karen and her HOA clique never messed with me or anyone else again. I grabbed my phone and called a lawyer. I needed someone who could help me turn the tables, someone who could show the HOA that they couldn't bully me anymore. The lawyer I found was sharp, and after a brief consultation, he was on my side. He told me that the HOA's actions were not only excessive, they were illegal. They had violated multiple laws regarding harassment and the enforcement of rules, and there was no way they could keep pushing me around without facing serious consequences. The plan was simple: fight back. But this time, with the full weight of the law behind me. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I was going to sue them. The next step in my plan was to prepare for the battle. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: the letters, the fines, the rules they had imposed, and the way they had selectively enforced them. My lawyer was impressed. It wasn't just about a simple dispute over water anymore. This was a clear case of abuse of power, and we had the ammunition to fight back. Karen wasn't ready for what was coming. A week later, I filed the lawsuit. The HOA was served with papers, and the whole neighborhood soon found out. The news spread like wildfire. People started talking. Some neighbors were supportive, others were hesitant, but one thing was for sure: Karen's reign of petty rules and fines was coming to an end. But the real turning point came when Karen, thinking she could intimidate me into withdrawing the lawsuit, showed up at my door. She knocked so hard it was almost as if she thought the door would give way. When I opened it, she was standing there with that look in her eyes, the same one I had seen every time she tried to control me, the one that said, "I'm in charge, and you're not." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "You're going to ruin everything. You're going to hurt this neighborhood." I looked at her, calm as ever, and said the words I had been waiting to say for so long. No, Karen. You ruined it. You ruined everything when you tried to control everyone. Now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Her face turned red. She sputtered something about the HOA's reputation, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was losing control. It was the first time I had ever seen her look vulnerable, and it felt good. For the first time in months, I wasn't scared of her anymore. The case went to court. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But every step of the way, I was there, showing them that I wasn't backing down. I was proving that their petty, oppressive little system had no place in the real world. And in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The HOA was forced to drop the fine, cancel their claims against me, and, most importantly, pay me restitution for the harassment. Karen was removed from her position as president, and a new board was elected, one that actually cared about the community rather than controlling it. As I walked out of the courthouse, I couldn't help but smile. I had done it. I had beaten the HOA at their own game, and more than that, I had shown them that you can only push people so far before they start pushing back. I was free, and I had won. But there was one thing still bothering me as I looked around at the neighborhood. I had taken down Karen, and I had taken down the HOA. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. How many more people were out there, living under the thumb of an HOA like mine? How many more people were waiting for their chance to stand up and fight back?